Hello, YouTube. Today I just want to bring out my Sage guide for the new season of Torchlight Afterlight. So, this is a bit of an awkward situation. TLI ended up taking so long to come online, and I didn't feel confident in making this guide yet until TLI came out online. So I knew like exactly all of the changes and just had the most accurate information possible. That I ended up actually just running out of time to make the guide versus when the service went offline. So I did go ahead and record some in-game footage for you that we can go over for the guide. However, I'm not unfortunately not able to show everything in-game, which does suck a little bit, but you know, it is just life. So, for leveling, we are going to be sticking with Chromatic Shot, but something we're going to be doing different this season as opposed to previous seasons. And the playback bugged out. Something that we are going to be doing different this season as opposed to previous seasons is that we are going to be going Prophet and doing Fizz to Cold Convert on Chromatic Shot. So once you get Spell Tango at level 55, you can swap over to Peculiar Vibe and to Acquaintance. However, before you have Acquaintance and Peculiar Vibe, when leveling from 1 to 55, I do recommend you instead run Burning Touch and you run Insight. Sorry, Beacon. So early on, you're going to be running the Beacon and you're going to be running Burning Touch. Which is quite standard, with nothing too much to say about it. Now, in the second tree, when we are going into Prophet, it is very important that we prioritize 2 points. We want to take this max Frostbite points, because these are the points that are going to be allowing us to eventually reach 100 Frostbite rating, which is what we need to be able to freeze enemies. And obviously, every point of Frostbite rating is additional damage that we're dealing to the enemy, so that is quite useful. And at the bottom here, we do need this convert physical damage to cold damage point. Eventually, you will be able to get this like from the Chromatic Shot support, the canvas support. But early on, we don't really have that option, and this is just the easiest way to do it. Also very important, you do want to take this node right here that allows you to inflict Frostbite when dealing cold damage, because this is actually what's going to apply the Frostbite to the enemies. And every point of Frostbite is additional damage that the enemies are taking. Then for our third tree, we are going to be going into the Marksman tree. The reason for this is quite simple. Chromatic Shot is a projectile skill, and as such, it does benefit from Gale scaling. And because we're going into the Gale tree, we obviously want to take projectile speed. Now, something I didn't do in this video, but in hindsight I should have done, is on the Goddess of Knowledge tree, once you get Gale, I think it's worth it to respec and to take these points at the bottom. These ones at the bottom will give you 18% projectile speed and 36% projectile speed. You do want to get as much projectile speed as possible once you do have access to Gale, because Gale is giving you a bunch of additional damage based off your projectile speed. Now, taking +1 jump and taking +2 horizontal penetration just makes the clear for Chromatic Shot feel significantly better. We also very early on are going to be taking greater multiple projectile support, but you'll see that once we get to it. Then for our last tree, we do go into Still Vanguard. I so badly want to just go into Lich, because if you go into Lich, you gain access to like +45 all stats, which is very, very, very good. Fitting Lich into this tree early on is just so potent and powerful because of that 45 all stats. But the more I was thinking about it, I just think you're probably better off doing Still Vanguard. Not only is Still Vanguard going to feel really good because you get Elixir charging progress, but on top of that, you're also just getting a bunch of like additional and base Elixir effect, which is going to buff up your Thirst Stew and your Life Potion up a ton. I'm honestly still 50-50 on it. I didn't have time to test. The servers just went down before I could do proper testing. I do think there is a universe where instead of still Vanguard, we just go Lich instead. I think I did test this before, but I just don't remember the results of my testing. But I think actually when I was testing this in the past, it did come out to Lich actually being better. And in Lich, the way you make it better is to take this point. So the way that you make Lich better is to actually take Indifference. But the problem with Indifference is you do need to have a decent amount of energy on all of your gear. So until you get that energy, you're probably going to have more damage on still Vanguard. Then once you get to like a point where you have like 150 unused energy, because you just don't need the energy in this build, at least not early on, you can swap to Indifference, get like this fat 30 to 40% additional multiplier from Indifference, as well as gain 45 all stats, which is equivalent to just having 135 attributes on Chromatic Shot, which is a pretty substantial damage increase. It is not something to scoff at. Obviously, however, if you were to do this, you're not going to have 100% uptime on your elixirs, and you are going to be relying on killing enemies to get your elixir uptime, and you're also not really getting the full value out of, like, you know, Sage and buffing your elixirs. So it's going to feel a bit weird, but I think it makes sense. I think both options are viable, though. I'm probably going to just use Still Vanguard on League Start, just because either way, in endgame, you're going to stick to Still Vanguard, and I don't really want to, like, respec from Lich to Still Vanguard, just because Lich was, like, slightly better than Still Vanguard for a limited amount of time. Also, the Still Vanguard tree is not even that bad. Like, when you don't have any elixir effect, these first few, like, 50% elixir effect that you get is actually pretty damn substantial. And it makes your additional elixir effect significantly stronger. Because you're going to be using Thirsty early game if you play Sage. So, you don't really take any damage percent nodes on the tree, because you just don't really need it on Sage. You'd much rather just take percent life, because one, it's going to make it tankier, it's going to feel way better. But two, you do need percent life on Sage for her hero trait at level 75. Her level 75 trait has this line. The percent of bonus applied to max life or max mana is applied to your elixir effect. You do want to get to 60% max life to cap this out. And eventually when you get this higher level, like 70%, 80%, because this is essentially just doubling the effectiveness of your curse that you're using in the build. And also Tailored Remedy, like, if you're going to Vanguard, you're obviously only playing 2 curses early game, and Tailored Remedy is just very, very broken. Now, I am level 90 in this preview, so I showed like how you should put your points in an early game. The reason I did this is it's very important in Torchlight when you're putting your points in initially, is you want to do 24 points in every talent tree, so that you can take the main talent in every single tree. But once you do reach the point where you have like spare talent points that you're just not using, it is worth it to just put those points into the Prophet tree. The Prophet tree is absurdly overloaded. And in the Prophet tree, you can get, you know, Cold Infiltration, which is a debuff on the enemies. It's going to be very powerful. You can get a Frostbite effect, which is going to make it that your Frostbite on the enemy, instead of just giving you 1% additional damage, it's going to give you like 1.6% additional damage per Frostbite point. And you can go up to 120 Frostbite, so that's very, very powerful. And that's what I'm going to suggest you do all your points on. Oh, and also you can gain access to Focus Besting Generation, which is just straight up a 20% additional multiplier, which is very powerful. So here I prioritize the Focus Besting for the 20% additional. Then I prioritize Cold Infiltration, which gives you 4.5% Cold Pen, which is like 6% additional, or like 5 to 6% additional. And I then take Cold Infiltration, which is another 13% additional. Now, I'm not entirely sure. It might just be better to instead go into Frostbite, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. Maybe instead of Cold Infiltration, maybe instead of these points, you just straight up focus Frostbite effect first. when I was recording this, I was just being very quick with it, so I didn't math it out. But just quickly, like doing some math in my head, I do think Frostbite Effect is going to win out over these other multipliers. So you probably go for Frostbite Effect first, then you go for Focus Blessings, then you go for Cold Infiltration. But realistically, it's not going to matter that much because a lot of these mods you can actually be getting on your slates. So instead of needing it on your tree, you can just have it on a slate. But as you can see, I used up all my points here, and there's not much more to say about that. So, for our main skill, as you are well aware of, I did decide to use Chromatic Shot. Obviously, we're using Spell Tangle, Manifold, Entanglement. These are just the two best supports by far. There's like no question about it. Then after that, I decided to go into multiple projectiles. So multiple projectiles is very, very, very good for Chromatic Shot. The thing about Chromatic Shot is it is a projectile skill that has shotgun in it. So scaling your projectile quant is a very efficient way to gain a ton of damage. And without multiple projectiles, your Chromatic Shot would actually do less damage than Ice Lance. But thanks to multiple projectiles, it does about 25% damage more than Ice Lance, just based off the projectile quant, nothing else on the skill. And then for the last two, I just chose Control Spell, Spell Concentration. It's confusing which one's technically the best. Control Spell is very good because it has like a very high multiplier on it, but it does have minus crit on it. And if you're losing crit cap to use Control Spell, like obviously that's not worth it. Spell Concentration is kind of like whatever to use, but maybe if the small projectile feels a bit weird for clear, like you might want to change it out for something else. I do go ahead and go through like each support though, and showcase some other supports that you can use instead. So if you really wanted to, instead of Spell Concentration, do not use Elemental Fusion. I was being stupid. You can use Quick Decision. I do suggest watching my video where I talk about Tangle breakpoints. Only use Quick Decision if it's actually getting you like a breakpoint in Tangles and it makes sense to use. Don't just equip it to equip it, but this can be very powerful. This can like get you like multiple breakpoints of Tangles, which can be a big DPS increase if you build around it and like take it into consideration. There's obviously Wind Projectiles. Wind Projectiles is not like the biggest multiplier at all, but it does come with turn projectile speed, which, especially when you have so little projectile speed, you know, that extra 20% early on does help a lot. And obviously, you are playing a cold skill now. You can use Glacial Freeze, and if you use Glacial Freeze, you can also drop the point on your tree that you basically take to inflict frostbite to enemies, because Glacial Freeze does have a line that it allows you to apply frostbite to enemies. Now, going to the new season, it's always been like the meta for sages to like play with a life tonic early on. I think for like the early progression stuff, especially when you're like taking a bunch of life notes and things, you can have like 4k life in Tarmox 8 and stuff. It is worth it to stick with a life tonic and still run one. But it's not necessarily mandatory. You can replace this for like a special elixir. The only thing you need to do if you drop life tonic is you then want to get you want to get life regain on hit in your build somewhere. So you just want to put a few points into life regain, or maybe craft life regain on like a wand or something. But until then, you can just stick with a life tonic. Or if you want for mapping, you can swap the life tonic out for Swiftness Dew. But then on the other hand, there's also Thirst Dew. I do not think you should ever replace your Thirst Dew. You should always keep the Thirst Dew equipped. Whereas the life tonic is the one that you can like replace for like a special dew early on, or you can replace it for Swiftness Dew, or you know, maybe if you need some help with your resistances, you can also just equip a resistance dew. Now for your Empower skill, I'm pretty sure Timid is just always the best. Like, if you just look at this just gives you like sorry, not this. If you look at your 45 trait, it just gives you like a ton of additional effect to your power skills and your curse skills. Actually, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure curses are just the best to do because curses have such like a high base value, and I can't really think of like any other support you could use instead of a curse that has like a similar amount of damage to utilize the extra 30% additional power effect. Maybe Empower, because you are using a projectile skill, so I do believe you have access to Empower. Sorry, to Aim. Like maybe using Aim as your Empower skill could maybe make more sense. Yeah, maybe. This is a buff for ranged skills. Ranged and beam skills. And this does not have the range tag, so you cannot use Empower. So yeah, you kind of don't really have any good Empowers, like supports to Empower, like Empower skills to use, just because spellcasters don't really have like anything crazy OP, like the same way that melees or ranged builds do. So for that reason, we're just gonna stick with Timid. And then, because of the new Sage being so nerfed in terms of the movement speed like factor, you kind of do have to use a Shadow Dash just for some mobility. Because mapping without a dash and without movement speed is just asking to have like the worst early game humanly possible. And like, I don't know, why would you do that to yourself? Not having a mobility skill is just a insane damage loss. Oh yeah, I guess you can use Ice Bond. You could use Ice Bond as your power skill with you could use Ice Bond with motionless support. Ice Bond level 20 with your 100% empowerment buff is going to be 56% additional. And if you instead use Timid level 20, you're going to be gaining 66% additional. So there really isn't any reason to use a support other than Timid. I don't know why you wouldn't use Timid. But that's something to consider. The reason I mention this and why I'm like spending so much time talking about it is because you can get Timid on like a Nether King's Divinity. The new mechanic that's being added to the league is the Nether King's Divinity, and it's probably going to be worth it as a Sage player to like try and find a early game Nether King that you can get like just some good modifier on it, but ideally you would get Timid on it if you can. And then for your auras, you have two options. You can either just do like a very standard setup of like doing two 50% auras. Like I would do Precise Projectiles and Spell Amplification. I think Spell Amplification just makes no sense. Instead of Spell Amplification, you can also do Frigid Domain. But obviously, like, you're not scaling plus cold levels because you don't have the cold tag on Chromatic Shot yet. So Frigid Domain doesn't make that much sense. So Spell Amplification, if you get any plus spell skill levels, that is also giving you plus levels to Spell Amplification. So it is slightly better to run than Frigid Domain. So that's going to be my like general suggestion. But if you wanted to, you could also just run like two 20% and a 10%. So the option for running like two 20% and 10% is you could do like Fire Magus, Thunder Magus, which would easily give you 100% crit, as well as just giving you, you know, Thunder Magus, which is really good. Or you can also consider running Ice Focus plus Thunder Magus. Because I don't really know if we're going to need to crit. I think you can reach crit cap on this build pretty easily without needing to have a, without needing to have a Fire Magus. And the benefit of doing this setup is it also then allows you to fit in a Swiftness. Now, later on, once you get a bit of sealed mana compensation, like if you do eventually go Lich or whatnot, or if you get a state of sealed mana compensation on it, you could possibly also fit in a 50% aura with 20% auras. Also, I'm just gonna straight up apologize about my voice. I am losing my voice recording so many videos today, but I do want to just get them done and get all the content out there for people. So just quickly looking at this, if you have an 8% sealed mana compensation and you're on a 50% with 3 20%, with no OTBT, but you have a low 20 restraint on every support. You are able to pretty easily fit in like all of your, 320% auras and a 50% aura. If you were to get +1 all level, you don't even need any sealed mana compensation to fit it in either. Just 21 precises are going to be enough for you, which you obviously do get from +1 all skills. As for your traits, I mean, just very standard stuff. You're going to be taking the top trait on level 45, the bottom trait on 60, and the top trait on 75. For your Scent Bottle, you can either go crit if you have enough crit chance, or you can just go the movement one. The movement one is going to be a lot more consistent than Husk, where you get charging progress from moving around. But the crit one does give you extra charging progress, so it is like a trade-off. Shattered Spore is just the best one. It has the highest multiplier. And then next season, we're not going to have Resilient Moss anymore. They did remove the injury buffer. So what we're going to do instead early game is we're going to be swapping to Prismatic Vine and converting our first damage taken to elemental damage. It's not like a huge help, but it does slightly reduce the damage that we're going to be taking in terms of first damage. Because generally speaking, like, any elemental damage you take has some reduction on it because you have elemental resistance in your build. But if you take first damage, you don't really have armor early game. So your first damage is like tends to be a lot less mitigated than your elemental damage. Eventually, we are able to swap that over to the damage transfer to minions. And if you are playing the setup that I was talking about earlier, about doing a 50% aura with a 20% and a 20% and 20%, the main reason I was talking about that setup is because with the new Resilient Moss, which instead of giving you injury buffer, it transfers the damage over to minions. Like this, it transfers damage over to minions. If you have two Magi skills, you can transfer a lot of the damage that you're taking to those Magi's. And even if they do eventually like die, which maybe they will, maybe they won't, I'll have to see how it feels, they will respawn over time. That's like the main benefit of going like 50% or 320% is you do get to Magi. So instead of having to do Prismatic Vine, which it is decent, it's not bad at all, you can instead just completely negate the damage by just having someone else take it for you. Like the fucking pillow princess you are. So, with all of that being said, YouTube, that was that part of the video. Now, let's move on to the next. Unfortunately, from here on out, we're not going to be having in-game gameplay anymore. So I'm going to be showing you things on Torchlight's database. And hopefully that's enough. I'm very sorry about the lack of video content. It has just an unfortunate side effect of the servers going down for 24 hours before the season launches. So, the first thing I do want to talk about is the hero memories. Because we're playing a Gale build, you want to try and get orange hero memories as soon as possible, and you want to get projectile speed on these hero memories. The best mod combination would be projectile speed with crit rating, but also like crit damage, damage percent, max life percent, all of those are good modifiers that make a lot of sense to have with Sage. But the main thing that you want to get is projectile speed. Oh, and also you're going to get cast speed, that's also pretty decent. As well as obviously movement speed. For your slates early on, ideally you want to get a pedigree with Gale on it, but realistically that's going to be very expensive. If you can't get a pedigree of Gale on it, just try to get one with like a generic damage multiplier on it. Like anything that's like a 30% damage multiplier, a 35% damage multiplier, all of those are going to be good. But if you can get access to a slate that has Gale on it, you're then going to spec out of the Goddess of Hunting, out of the Marksman tree. So you'll completely drop the Marksman tree. You'll drop this like Gale tree completely. And instead, we're going to be then speccing into Lich. And if you do spec and Lich with the new season, it is worth it to go for sealed mana compensation, to go off the beaten track, and then run 3 50% auras, as well as like a 10% aura. Obviously, if you do this, you will not have access to Magi anymore, which means you can't do the damage transfer anymore. So it is a trade-off, and maybe once I get to test it and actually play around with it, I'll not agree with this anymore. I'll think that it's better to have Magi to do damage transfer too. But at least numerically speaking, I think that this is just going to be the better setup, and this is going to be like the preferred setup to do. And definitely damage-wise, it is the best setup, but Magi tend to be like that, where like they're not always the best damage-wise, they're just very good defensively. I just don't think you actually need the extra defense on Sage. I think she's tanky enough as is. And even without injury buffer, I guess I'll talk about this quickly. Life Tonic is really good early game. As long as you're not getting one-shot, your Life Tonic is just going to heal you to max HP every fucking second. Like, it is a very, very good defensive layer to just have a fat Life Tonic, even if you don't have injury buffer to like offset the damage even more and give yourself a bigger hit pool. And then next up. Oh, and for the rest of your Sage, for your slates. So something that's going to be very important for your slates is you either want your slates early on to give you you either want your slates early on to give you +1 spell level or +1 all level, or you want to get slates that give you mods from the Prophet tree. If you can get first convertive cold, that's really good. If you can get cold infiltration, that's really good. If you can get blessing generation, that's really good. Anytime you get a mod like this from the Prophet tree, that's 4 points on your tree that you don't have to take, and that's 4 points that you can instead put into Frostbite effect, or eventually that you can put into like Lich, because Lich has a bunch of good nodes that you want to take. Just in case anyone is not aware of what you want to take on Lich, let me just show the priority for that tree. As soon as you have access to all stats, so you put like you put like 6 points here or 6 points here in the damage percent. You'll put 3 points like on attack speed, and then you go 6 points on all stats. All stats is very, very valuable for Chromatic Shot. It's really important to get it. Then you'll max out all skills, and then, only then will you prioritize sealed mana compensation. But the problem with that is if you do it in this way, you do need 29 points to get like the final point of sealed mana compensation. So you very ideally would like to like not have to go any of these bottom nodes on Prophet. Because if you don't have to go any of these nodes, that does open up you to get off the Frostbite effect, which is like the most important nodes in this tree, and have bonus points to spend on Lich, and get all of like just the niceties in the Lich tree. Then next up, let's talk about Kismets. Early on, I wouldn't worry too much about Kismets, but some good Kismets to consider in the very early game is just crit Kismets, res Kismets, or attribute Kismets. I think attributes are significantly weaker on Sage as opposed to other characters though, because she has so many sources of all stats, which just makes the value of them go down a lot. So most likely what you're going to be doing early game is just res and crit damage. For your Prism, I highly recommend early game you pick up just a cheap Haze Prism. They are very, very powerful, and they can allow you to basically negate 3 points on the tree. So I mentioned on the Prophet tree, we want to minimize the amount of points we're wasting as possible. Points like this, which is just 27% cold damage, or 10% damage while focus basing is active, these are very, very inefficient points. If you can instead put a Prism on them, so you don't have to take them, and you need 3 less points to get your focus basing generation, or to get your first convert, that is massive for your build. So I highly recommend you just pick up a cheap Prism early on. They tend to be like 5 to 10 FE, and they give a decent... They essentially just give you 3 levels worth of talent points. For belt blends, I do recommend just going on the market and just buying like a cheap belt blend that has something on it like plus one all is the best, but they're probably going to be pretty expensive. But even just getting like 8% armor pen is really good. 8% armor pen is like equivalent to like in the early game equivalent to like a 10% additional multiplier. You can also get like you can also get like 10% additional damage against frozen targets. You know, any belt blend like that is worth picking up. It's just 10% more damage, and it's generally not very expensive early into the league. It's like 5 to 10 FE. And you're probably gonna not replace that belt until you get Omni Elixir. So you're gonna be able to use that belt for a very long time. I wouldn't bother with weapon sequences early game. I think they're not worth it. And something that you can consider doing is trying to make an early Vorax item. You do have quite a few like interesting options for an early game Vorax. I guess this is a good section to also talk about legendary items that you want to pick up on the character. But a very good like early game legendary item that you can consider to make a Vorax of is going to be mostly the neck slots. So one option that you have for like an early game Vorax is going to be you can either get like the illusionary necks, you can get like illusionary ocean silk, and from this you can get biting cold on hit as a Vorax. It's a very cheap way that not a lot of people know about to get like an early form of curse on hit. You can get a Vorax from Old Grudge to pull out the +1 tango and the critical strike rating without needing to give up the next slot for like not useless but not like super useful stats either. And those are pretty much the two main options I would consider for Voraxing. There are other options that you can consider, but it very much just depends. And I think early game a neck Vorax just makes the most sense because a lot of the early game necks are just like fairly cheap and extremely potent to Vorax. Like the neck legendary slot is a pretty potent legendary slot in the early game. So being able to turn them into a Vorax is like a big power spike. And Voraxes are actually very cheap in the early game. Voraxes like become infinitely more expensive as time goes on. But in my experience, like if you do your Vorax item like very early into the league, it tends to be very cheap from people doing like Time Rock 8 Vorax who are just selling like all the materials for super cheap, just trying to get rid of it ASAP. Also, going to the new season, we did lose our awesome renewed memory. So last season we had like this, we had the survival memory that gave us elixir effect and elixir charging progress. We are no longer gonna have that. My suggestion is to just get one of these all-stat ones instead. I looked at all of them and either you go spell crit for everyone int, this seems decent, or you just go for all stats. These honestly just seemed like the two best options in my opinion, as like an early game one. Oh, obviously you are playing a frost skill, you can also just do critical strike rating against frozen enemies. This critical strike rating against frostbitten enemies, by the way, is significantly better than this. Because this is giving you base crit rating, and you already have a lot of crit in this build thanks to Thirst You. I think this honestly might be the best memory revival, but all stats is gonna definitely be a close second. It kind of depends where you are in your gearing progress, because what you'll do with Sage, like in the early game, if you watch my like episode 0 of Exploring Every Inch of Sage, which I highly recommend you go and check out. That video is like basically what I'm gonna be doing in the new season, outside of the changes I've mentioned in this video that are like different from, you know, when I made that. Once you get like your Void Embarkment and you have like 100 all stats, you go into lit, you have a 45 all stats, the value of this memory goes down a significant amount. And at that point, just getting crit cap becomes more important. But I think both are going to be fine to choose from. And I would recommend doing one of these two instead of going for like a, what do you call it? Instead of going for a 4th memory slot. The main problem with going for a 4th memory slot on Sage is you don't really care all that much about like buffing these ingredients up early game. Like getting 1% additional, taking this from level 1 to 2 is just not very big on this hero at all, as opposed to other heroes that tend to have a slightly bigger gain from using the base like memory slot, or like the 4th memory slot. But anyway, YouTube, that's gonna be my Sage guide. Again, I recommend highly to just go and watch the Sage, like Exploring Every Inch of Sage, episode 0. That covers anything that isn't covered in this video. Specifically, it covers gear and legendary options and like how strong various options are. Everything in that video is still relevant outside of the things I mentioned in this video specifically. The only thing you're changing from that video are the things that I brought up in this video. Okay? You're still using the renewed memory, like you're using the different renewed memory, but you're still using the same legendaries. You're still using the same crafting logic. You're still crafting the same items. You're still going for the same stuff. Nothing has changed. The only difference is Chromatic Shot now supports you being a full-on cold build instead of being like a generic spellcaster. Again, so sorry about my voice, and thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys had a lovely day, and I'll see you all again next time. Bye, YouTube. Bye-bye.